welcome to Fireside Chat. And I'm very pleased to have my guest, Dr. Christopher Passalacqua from Discover Chiropractic, here to visit. And very excited to have him here. He's my personal chiropractor and very, very pleased to learn and to listen and to, imagine what we can do to take better care of ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
It's all about wellness.
Absolutely. Prevention and wellness.
Welcome, Dr. Christopher.
Thank you very much. I'm humbled and flattered that you would even have me back a second time.
So pleased.
This should be a lot of fun today because I think it's going to be a little bit more extemporaneous with, let's off the cuff and answer questions and see what we come up with. And hopefully the listening audience or at least the viewing audience can say, maybe these guys are onto something.
I hope so, right?
Me too.
Because we want to make it, you're so welcome. We want to make sure that if there's any kind of, apprehension about chiropractic or people are just like, I've never tried it. We want to nudge them in the direction of let me just try it once.
Yeah.
And then, right? And then it's really good if you try it a couple of times because then you're beginning a process, right? When you first go.
Correct. A lot of times people have the idea where they might take the opportunity to compare. I'm in pain. I have a headache, so I can take 2 aspirin. The aspirin helps mollify or calm down the headache, and then they're good to go. And that is the difference between treating something or looking at something symptomatically, which means it's going to be subjective. I can't see anybody's pain. I can't see a headache.
Yeah.
That's a symptom. A sign is something that we can see. So I take your blood pressure and it's high. Well, that's a sign. I can see that.
Right.
I can take your temperature and we know that it's high. That's a fever. I can see that.
Oh, can you come over a little bit? Yeah, in that direction. Very good. Very good.
Okay.
There we are.
No problem at all.
Excellent.
So you come in with a broken arm or a
signs.
dislocation, a burn, anything that I can objectively see, those are much easier. And that's kind of what diagnosing is really about and taking care of people, is actually getting away from the icing on the cake and let's see what's built into the cake.
Yeah, and how can we help? I know because with me, when I was kind of had an acute pain, you're dealing with the most acute things first.
Yeah, at times, if someone comes in with a chief complaint, you came in, if you don't mind me saying, I don't want to violate any HIPAA.
Yeah, I want to talk about
you
it.
came in with pain. And so we are convinced in this nation that pain is the very worst thing we could possibly be in. I mean, there's a whole industry where doctors are quote unquote pain doctors or pain modifying doctors. Their job is usually to make a prescription of some kind. I think you and I touched very, very immaturely on the whole OxyContin and the oxycodone and the fentanyl and the things that are used to reduce pain. And they have a place. We talked before about chiropractors don't believe in drugs. Of course we believe in drugs. I don't believe in chiropractic, we enjoy or recommend the indiscriminate use of medications.
Right.
Every pill you put inside your body has an effect. And in the pharmaceutical world, when they say, well, these are common side effects. No,
Right.
It's a side effect because it's no longer taking care of the original symptom that you came in with. It is on the side of that. But those really are direct effects. For example, I read a article this week out of a journal, and it said that the leading cause of liver failure is the misuse of acetaminophen.
Wow.
And that's a problem because there are a lot of people who pop acetaminophen, which is an NSAID, right, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, and they pop them like pezzas or sweethearts. And they want to know why their stomach's in trouble and their lining's in trouble and their liver's in trouble. Because if it's one thing that everybody needs to understand about basic biochemistry, it is this. You cannot put something in your system for nothing. There's always going to be a give and take. For example, I'm thirsty. You were kind enough to bring me a bottle of water. Well, that water goes in. My goal is to slake my thirst. I get that. But the water's going everywhere. Your blood's mainly of water.
That's true.
Lymph fluid is basically made of water. Your muscles are 65% water. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that water and proper hydration do to your system. But that is the effect of water in our system. So when people come in and they say, is there a possibility I can get one adjustment and solve my pain problem? In chiropractic, or at least in my office, we call that the one-hit wonder. They came in, you give them the proper adjustment, and their pain goes away. The problem is we could do every test and every measurement that we used before and reproduce the same results. All we're not reproducing is the pain response.
Okay.
And in a period of time, the problem, if it's not corrected, will come back. it will rear its ugly head, and then the problems come back, and that's usually when people always come back and say the most dangerous words that I hear. I thought it would go away. And sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it does. The one-hit wonders are good.
Yeah.
Not every chiropractic office specializes in prevention, and not every chiropractic office specializes in corrective chiropractic care.
Okay.
So there's 3 aspects to coming into the office.
Right.
You would come in and say, look, I want to get just enough adjustments that my body feels pretty good. That's what we call relief care or
Right.
symptomatic care.
Right.
Then people stick around and go through what we call corrective care, where they'll go through a series of adjustments.
Right.
We'll look at their diet, we'll look at their stress levels, and then we'll look at their exercise patterns. And then we'll say we need to make so many adjustments before we'll redo an examination to check to see what type of progress we're going to make. Then the third type of care is what we call wellness care. So Sue's been a patient of mine for 30 years. 30 years? Why would someone go to the chiropractor for 30 years? My answer is, why would you brush your teeth for 30 years?
That's true.
Why would you take a shower every day for 30 years?
That's true.
Why would you wash your hair for 30 years?
Yeah.
Why would you take care of your car for 30 years? Why would you take care of your marriage for 30 years? Because the things that we have a tendency to value, we take care of.
That's true.
And we only get one body.
Yeah, that's true. You can't trade it in for...
No.
No,
we're not trading it in on the trophy model. You know, the little guy who's holding a tennis racket on the top of a trophy? That guy.
Right, exactly.
We're not trading those in.
Exactly, or the basketball or whatever.
Yeah,
I
course.
have a treatment plan here,
Yep.
and we can have a look at it.
On number 9.
My actual, that's right. That's camera 9, which I love camera 9. I just have to, there it is. Okay, great.
I'm going to look on
So,
I haven't
I'm
seen it.
gonna go-
I think camera 9 may be on your smaller one. I think he said that. Let's see.
Okay, so like camera 9, I don't think it's there. I'm just going to look for it here, Lord. Then there's all these things. Let's see. Or we could start with the slides too, and then we can also move to the other.
Yeah, you ask the
Right.
questions that you want to ask, and we'll go
Yeah.
ahead and see if we can answer them properly.
Yeah, okay. So I want to go back to like here it is. I see. That's camera 9.
That's
Okay,
camera
great.
9.
So this is actually where you were commenting on what we found after x-rays and after an examination. And so you were highlighting for me where you thought that there were some problems. And I know that when we talked about subluxations.
Right, the misalignments in the spine.
Yeah. So if you want to kind of point
Let
to
me,
different
let me.
things that we can
I'll
talk
walk you
about
through
it.
this here,
Yeah, I
and that way
appreciate
we
that.
can do.
This is great.
Okay, so I'm trying to get this here because there's a lot of stuff here in the upper corner.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so on where the pen is, I'll put the pen there where you can see.
Yeah.
So your findings when we did our examination and our x-rays is that we determined through analysis you have a 50% loss of curve in the neck.
Wow.
And so when we look at the pictures of your x-rays, we'll be able to look at that a little bit more because we'll have a comparison.
Right.
There was something on there, the second line says inferior atlas angle. The very first vertebrae is commonly known as atlas. If it does not have a superior word angle, it has the ability to cause an irritation and a tugging and a tension on some of the connective tissue where the spinal cord connects into the spine itself.
Okay.
And so that is actually the most important. Elf Brieg, who was a Swedish neurosurgeon, said that is the most important angle because it has an opportunity to affect the very first vertebrae atlas and the second vertebrae axis. And from an Adam Sandler movie, you remember the term medulla oblongata. And that is just a very technical name for your brain stem.
Okay.
And so your brain stem elongates through the first 2 vertebrae.
Okay.
So if those 2 are out, if the angle is out, we're going to have some problems. The third one is called misalignments, and sometimes it's easier for somebody to remember the name of spinal misalignment versus a subluxation. Subluxation is a much more detailed name that talks about the spine being out of alignment to such a degree that the nerves are being irritated.
Wow.
And you can have a misalignment, but not necessarily fulfill all the metrics of having a subluxation. So a subluxation would be a misalignment, an occlusion of the foramen that opens, pressure or irritation on the nerve, and then you would have an interruption in the way that nerve is conducting its activity.
Right.
Can I have a misalignment and not have those? Yes, because if you have a misalignment that does not irritate the nerve specifically where you're decreasing the nerve. And our founder, D.D. Palmer, said that when nerve irritation occurs, it either hyper-excites the nerve or it hypo-excites the nerve.
Okay.
So on the other side of that, I'll have too much function or not enough function. And a classic example would be I'm constipated. That's an underfunction.
Okay.
I have diarrhea. That's a hyperfunction.
All right.
I have high blood pressure. That's a hyperfunction. I have low pressure. That's a lower function.
Okay.
So each nerve can cause one or both of those at the same time, which is kind of weird because, remember, we've talked about each spinal nerve can be broken down into three categories. One is trophic, which means that's function or healing.
Okay.
Autonomic, which means it's controlling our organs. And then the other one is sensory, which controls how we feel or that pain response.
Okay.
And so I can not necessarily be in pain, but I can be constipated.
Right.
I don't necessarily need to be in pain, but I can be hypomobile and not moving the right way because the motor portion of the nerve is being affected.
Okay.
So people, unfortunately, the medical community and the pharmaceutical industry have done a great job of convincing us that as long as we, quote unquote, feel okay, we must be okay. And the answer is that's not necessarily good because we go to the doctor for this once-a-year physical.
Yeah.
Okay, most people go in for a physical and they're feeling actually pretty darn good. Well, then what are you there for? Okay, I can measure my height at home. I
Yes.
can take my pulse at
It's
home.
true.
I can
Go to
take
an eye
my
doctor.
weight at home,
Yeah.
right? And so a lot of these prophylactic tests that they do, we could probably do at home.
Yeah.
And if the doctor's honest, what he can also tell you is you can pass your physical with flying colors, walk out the door, have a heart attack, and die. So it is not as prophylactic as people think.
Wow.
Now, if my patients say to me, should I get a physical once a year? My answer would be, sure, if your insurance company's going to pay for it. If they're not going to pay for it, what exactly are you looking for?
Right.
And that's when I say, go get your blood work done. You can
That's
get your
better.
blood pressure done. You can get your pulse and respiration and all that fun stuff. But the blood work is really what you're looking for, and that's what we call like a SMAC 30. And you would have 30 different tests done with your blood to determine what we're looking for. Blood tests, urine tests, fecal tests, hair analysis, skin analysis, X-ray, CAT scan, PET scans, biopsies. They usually don't lie. They're doing their job. And so when
Right.
something comes up, we have to take a look at it.
Wow.
We have patients bring their blood work to us all the time, and we look at some of their measurements, and then we can make some recommendations
Oh,
from
that's
there.
interesting.
What do you need to eat more of? What do you need to stay away from?
Wow.
Are you too sedentary? What's your stress level? This week alone, we did 4 reviews on blood analysis, and then another male patient of mine has low testosterone, and he's interested in what are some very natural approaches towards
Very good.
increasing natural testosterone levels. And then the fourth thing we write up there is a word called arthritis.
Yeah.
There are different forms of arthritides. Most people are familiar with osteoarthritis. Anytime you see an itis on the end of a word, it usually means inflammation of. If you
What's
see
the
an
word?
osis on the end of the word, it's usually chronic irritation of.
Okay.
One's acute, one's more chronic. So if I have tendinitis, my tendons are inflamed, they've been irritated. If I have tendinosis, those irritations have now become chronic, and usually you are going to see some permanent changes within the architecture of the structure.
Wow.
And they usually get thicker. And
Okay.
tendinosis is hard to get rid of because once it thickens, and then you just deal with it from there.
That's awful.
The arrow is pointing towards the neck spine, or what we call the cervical spine. If you look, you'll see things like in the upper left-hand corner, C4, then you'll see C5 and C6, C7 all the way down. What that indicates is that there are nervous connections to every organ, every system, and every function in our body.
Okay.
So the vertebrae, the fourth vertebrae, has nerves that exit out that will now influence the nose, the lips, the mouths, all that kind of, the eustachian tubes, the mucous membranes, the lungs.
Right.
So it's not unusual that parents bring kids in with middle ear infections, with sore throats, with
Yes.
asthma, with allergies, with
Yes.
bedwetting. And we can, unfortunately, some would say, but isn't that cookbook chiropractic? The answer is, I guess, in a very immature form, it would be cookbook chiropractic. But if I start my car and my oil light goes on, I'm probably not going to check my tires.
Right.
And so we can look and say, okay, here we go.
Fine.
So when you start looking, and what we do for our patients is we highlight, major areas in blue And then we can look and say, okay, you go home and you start doing your research and look at C7 there about the middle of the picture.
Right.
If we go over and look at C7, thyroid glands, we have bursas, things that feed the shoulder, elbow, hands, neck muscles. All of those can be irritated. Excuse me.
I think it goes towards you.
So if we keep going this way, we just keep going down, and we're going to see the same thing. If we go all the way to the bottom, now we look and we say, okay, in your lower spine or your lumbar spine, your neck is 7 cervical vertebrae, your mid-back or your thoracic spine or dorsals are 12, and then your lumbar or low back is 5 vertebrae.
Okay.
In yours and our analysis, there was a 30% loss of curve. There are misalignments. There is arthritis in there, which means there's more of that disc thinning. And as the discs begin to thin, it decreases the size of the opening or the frame and where the nerve exits out. And now that, because of the lessening of the space, it begins to occlude that opening. I can only put my finger through an opening that will allow my finger to go through an opening, or my ring. What happens if I gain a bunch of weight? I can't take my ring off because there's no room for it to move. So once this opening gets smaller, the nerve root irritation has a greater opportunity to express itself. When that nerve irritation becomes chronic, there is some evidence that shows that the nerve roots can, will, and do begin to shrink. As it begins to shrink, think of the idea of I want to put a fire out in my house with a garden hose.
Right.
You say, why don't you use a fire hose?
Yeah.
Well, because the hose has shrunk, and now I just get to put the fire out with a garden hose.
Right.
And so we want to take the pressure and irritation away from that opening. And then with you, you had pelvic unleveling. So when your mom's mad at their kids or your wife is mad at you and she puts her hands on your hips, would I say, oh, are you doing a pelvic check? Not really. But the pelvis itself, or what they call the innominates, can be out of alignment. And then the pelvis misalignment in and of itself brings its own set of problems. People love coming in and saying, my low back hurts, and they always point right here. And they're pointing really to their pelvis.
Wow. But they think it's their lower back.
They think it's their lower back, but their pelvis. The classic one is, I think my tailbone's hurt. And I say, okay, touch where you think your tailbone is. And it's nowhere near their tailbone.
Nowhere near where the tailbone actually is.
Nowhere near.
So if we look at the my actual
X-rays.
Yeah. I just have to
By the
find
way,
the cursor.
viewing audience, Sue is doing this off the cuff. So anything that you see, we are really proud of her technologic savvy. Have at it, kid.
You just really want to see the cursor. See, I see the cursor over there. So let's see if I can bring it here. It's too bad I can't.
I think you said to hit go live.
Yeah, he did for me. So, but all of the buttons say live. So I'm trying to go over to where my slides are. Oh, I've got it. So this is actually, the left is a normal X-ray, and the
right would be a normal.
Oh, the right is normal. Okay.
The right is normal.
Oh, see, because they have that nice curve. Look at that.
Correct. So now you're looking at a basic X-ray of what we call a lateral cervical, or from the side. And we're looking at the right film now. Let's not look at the left film.
Yep.
If we look at the right film, there are some things that we want to take into consideration. You can see like an open wedge, like a small triangle on the right-hand side. That's a measurement of that first vertebrae angling up.
That we talked about.
Right, Elf-Brieg's measurement. And so that angle needs to be somewhere between 18 and 25 degrees. That's where we would like it. That's a superior or upward angle and curve. That is the most important. If you came in to see me, and I'll name a few things that people come in to see me with.
Yeah.
If you came in to see me with asthma, with allergies, ear infections, sore throats, high blood pressure, menstrual difficulties, we see lots of constipation, diarrhea. We see lots of things. That's the first angle I want to take a look at. And it doesn't make a difference that it's in your neck, because if the information isn't getting from the brain to the tissue cell, we're having that interruption. Right. So that's the most important. As a matter of fact, I redid X-rays today on 2 wonderful patients, my husband and wife, and both of them have actually increased that angle, that brief Elf-Brieg angle, more towards normal. Now, if we look at yours on the left-hand side, yours is basically flat. And so with it being flat like that, It's kind of like your cousin who puts his fingers in front of your face and says, wiggles them, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. And then you would say, yeah, but you're irritating me. That's kind of what we have going on. It's like a background static neurologically that goes on. It tugs, again, on the covering of the spinal cord.
Okay.
The next thing you can see on the right-hand side is there's a small bowing of the neck forward. That's what we call a lordosis, or a forward angulating curve.
Right.
You have a lordosis both in your neck and you have a lordosis in your lower back.
Right.
In your mid-back, it's called a kyphosis. So when we talk about the hunchback of Notre Dame, that's a hyperkyphosis, or where you see a little lady who's hunched. That's going backwards.
Exactly.
If we switch our attention back to the left-hand side, unfortunately, my friend, yours is straight. So, what do we know from physics? Well, we know that isosceles triangles have 3 45-degree angles.
Yes.
And why is it 3 45-degree angles? Well, iso means 1, so it's the same. And what you're looking at is a deflection or a deferring of stress equally in each of those angles.
Oh,
so if we turn the isosceles triangle from the side, we would see that the neck curve is 45 degrees. Mm-hmm. We would see the mid-back is 45 degrees backwards, and then we would see the low back being 45 degrees forward again. What do we fight constantly? What is the constant force being put on us no matter what we're doing or what position we're in?
Gravity?
Gravity, exactly right. So the force of gravity is driving us down constantly. And so you and I are sitting here, we're using proper biomechanics, our heads are back. Mm-hmm. But think about a kid. What does he do all day? He looks down to the ground on his phone. So he has tech neck. So he's flattening that curve all the time. What do engineers do? They're looking forward, their head comes out in front of them, called
it's like
forward
they're
head.
peering.
Yeah, forward head translation. And all of that begins to affect the biomechanics of the spine, and it begins to put workloads on the spine. Remember this, if I have a chain gang of 24 prisoners known as vertebrae, and 2 of my prisoners say, I'm not working today, well, what happens to the rest of the prisoners? They're going to have to work harder because they still have to accumulate and do the workloads that are presented to them. So as you look at your film on the left-hand side, we go down to almost the bottom, you can see that the spaces in between your vertebrae are now beginning to degenerate or get smaller. There's a word that we love to use, it's a word called desiccation. Think of when you were a little kid and a sponge fell behind the sink and you found it 3 months later. It's all curled up, it has no water, and it's dried out, right? Yeah. That's desiccated. That's what happens to the disc material because of a large amount of water within the disc. When you lose that water, it's a hard time coming back. Discs themselves are poorly innervated by blood and water, so what they need is movement. And that's why there's an old saying that says, you want to keep living? Keep moving.
Okay.
Right. And so everything about that is to maintain the integrity within the disc and in the structure itself. If you look at 2 vertebrae, the disc, the nerve, and wherever that nerve goes to, that's called a motor unit.
Okay.
And so anytime you get the lessening of the disc space, the occlusion of the opening where the nerve pressure is on, you're going to affect, quote unquote, the motor unit.
Okay.
So wherever that nerve goes to is going to have the effect of not enough information going through it. And now you have adaptation that becomes maladaptation. Right. And where there should be coordination, now you become incoordination. Okay. Here's the issue. What happens if only one cell in your body breaks down? Well, you think, so what? I mean, I scratch myself, I get a suntan, I get a sunburn, I get my facial once a month, I soap up all the time. Okay, great. There is a principle in physiology called automaticity. Okay. And it's a big word that means this. There isn't a cell in your body that doesn't contribute to the overall functioning of your system. Wow. You damage enough cells, they can become symptomatic. You damage just a few cells, hey, who cares what's a couple cells between friends? But by the time that you are experiencing a symptom or some type of pathology has begun to accumulate, you're looking at automaticity in its finest fashion. Okay. Now you're affecting the integrity not only of the structure, but now you're affecting the physiology of the system.
And now it's going in a sort of a not good direction rather than in a normal homeostasis.
Right, we would call that a declension. It's starting to go downward.
Okay. So let's look at the middle. Sorry. That one. Oh yeah, that's the front view.
That's the
yeah.
front view. So on the right-hand side this time, you see a big black line going straight down. It's nice and straight. We see those little upside-down V's being bisected
Yeah.
because we take the time in our office to actually physically analyze the spine. It's not just a visual, but if I were to say, hey, I'm going to draw you a circle, and I draw a circle, and you're like, oh, that's a circle. And then I take a compass out, and I draw a circle right next to it, you might look and say, Dr. Christopher, what's up with your really weird non-circle anymore?
Your freehand wasn't
Your
really.
freehand.
Yeah.
So what we do in our office, and the way that I was taught and mentored, is that you always do a physical biomechanical analysis of the spine. So A, I can know where I'm starting from. It's a baseline.
Yes.
And B, okay, you've gone through a succession of adjustments and now you're starting to get adjusted on a regular basis. How do I know you're getting better?
Right.
Oh, I feel so much better. No. Feeling good does not necessarily equal good function.
You want to check.
And
it.
so what we want to do is we want to use what we call objective, measurable assessments.
That's exactly what this is.
And so someone would say, well, who cares about that? All right, I'll give you an example on who cares about that. You have high cholesterol, which is a whole nother podcast in the future. I'm not a big fan of high cholesterol in everybody thinking that high cholesterol is a deleterious or pathologic situation.
Okay.
We have some research that shows it's not as bad as people think.
Okay.
Well, that's another podcast. Let's look at it this way. You go in for high cholesterol. They measure your blood. They want you over 200, which, by the way, at one point, 250 was the normal. And now they want to put it below 200 so they can sell you more cholesterol-reducing
Lipitor.
drugs. Sure. That's another whole podcast on that. Anyway, and then you're on the medication for a period of time. What do? They use another measurable outcome, which is to do what? Do your blood test again and find out what your cholesterol level is. You're on a great diet. You weigh 100 pounds and you want to lose weight. Okay, how are you doing on your diet? Oh, great, my jeans are fitting better. Didn't ask you how your jeans were fitting. Step on the scale, and now we have a measurable outcome.
Right.
And so when you use a biomechanical reasoning in looking at the spine, because the spine is a physical, mathematical unit that functions in our bodies, we can look. There are angles. I mean, if I break my arm or separate my shoulder, isn't there an angle that my shoulder should be sitting at?
Yes.
Well, of course. And so we measure those angles spinally.
Okay.
And that way, when we do our updates and use our objective assessments and our outcomes, we can say to you, my friend, are better.
Because you can prove it.
Because I can prove it.
You can quantify it.
And that's why we use infrared technology in doing skin temperature assessments.
Okay.
Because nerve irritation will cause inflammation.
Yes.
Inflammation causes heat to be thrown off.
Yes.
Right? Your son says, I don't feel so good. What do you feel? You feel his forehead to find out if there is a
Warmth. like a little
fever.
bit, yeah,
Because the body throws
fever.
off heat when it's inflamed. And so we use that. We use well-established orthopedic or neurologic testing. We use grip strength. And then we also use x-rays because those are the way that we can measure these outcomes.
The last X-ray is it's a different view. Let's see. It is.
Okay, so this is the lumbar. Yep.
This is the lower back.
Right,
okay.
lumbar, lower back.
Yeah.
So on the right-hand side is the normal, and I have a bunch of lines on there to explain to patients what we're looking at to see a normal film. What do we want to see that makes it normal? So that we see your film on the left-hand side, and we see that it is out of alignment. And I can look from here and see that your
You can
pelvis
see
is
from
slightly
here.
out of alignment. On the right side of your pelvis, there is an internal rotation, and then you can see a little gap there where you get the leaning tower of Hanley.
Right. Yeah. So it's not stacked on top of each other like vertebrae should, right?
Correct, equally. And so what do we know about that? When bones stack unevenly, there is something called Wolff's Law.
Okay.
Wolff's Law says that bones grow in its greatest area of stress. So just for the heck of it, I'm going to take a picture of your finger, and then what we're going to do is I'm going to put a clamp on your finger for the next 6 weeks, where that clamp is touching the finger where the most amount of pressure in the bone, you are going to see new bone being laid down.
My goodness.
And so what happens is we start getting things like spurs, osteophytes, thickening of joint spaces because the vertebrae are out of alignment, and whether we like it or not, Wolff's Law applies to our spine.
So is that why bone spurs can
Bone spurs can form.
develop?
And there's other thoughts on bone spurs because excuse me again, Sometimes they're known as traction spurs.
Okay.
Right? If I keep on tugging you, I'm tractioning it out. Well, you have 9 common ligaments that surround and encapsulate the spine. Ligaments are connective tissue structures that are designed to hold bone to bone.
Okay.
If the bone is out of alignment, it tugs or irritates the ligamentous attachments.
Okay.
And as it's irritating, it will keep pulling a little bit. And as it pulls and the misalignment is allowed to become chronic, you're going to get Wolff's Law in application.
Wow.
Now, the interesting thing that most people, some people know us, I guess, is that the nerve supply of each of those ligaments is very important because the nerves tell the ligaments what to do.
Okay.
The disc, the intervertebral disc, is considered a ligament. Now, its function is duplicious because not only does it hold bone to bone, it separates bone from bone when you're talking about the spinal discs itself.
It's like a disc between the vertebrae?
Right. And so when people have quote-unquote herniating discs, if you look at a disc, it is fibrous. The angles of the fibers, called the annulus fibrosus, they are perfectly angled for allowing us to do lots of movements.
Okay.
But in the middle of that is something called the nucleus pulposus. And the nucleus pulposus is kind of like a ball bearing in there, but it's fluid-filled.
Okay.
And so imagine, if you would, that I put a 2x4 over a ball bearing, and I have to balance that on there, right?
Yeah.
I can go all kinds of different directions. That's what the nucleus allows us to do.
Okay.
It doesn't move as much as people think. But when there's degeneration, when there's that desiccation, when there's been injury, when there's inflammation, it begins to create a scar tissue network that is never as healthy, nor elastic, nor as resilient as healthy tissue. And now we begin to see it's a weakening of the tissue.
Okay.
So now we work too hard in the weekend. We're weekend warriors. We're lifting weights. We're not using our back the right way. Dad's chasing mom around the house on Friday. And they all come in, they say, my low back is bothering me. What is going on?
Right.
Usually what you're going to see is a swelling in that nuclear material.
Okay.
And the nuclear material has to go somewhere because swelling has to go somewhere.
It's got to go somewhere. It's almost like a swelling brain.
Right. It's a space-occupying lesion. Swelling and inflammation occupies space.
Yeah.
Well, the easiest place for that swelling to go is backwards because of the location of it. It's not perfectly in the center. It's slightly backwards or posterior.
Okay.
So as it swells, it causes the rest of the disc to expand a little bit. Well, where does that go? It goes either backwards into the spinal cord, or it goes backwards and laterally onto the nerve roots.
Okay.
And so now people come in and say, I think I have a disc issue. Okay, you can have swelling, you can have bulging, you can have herniating, and you can have sequestered. Let's look at the menu and see which one you would like today.
Wow.
Each of those represent actually a grade of severity.
Okay.
You don't want sequestered. You would need a surgical intervention at that point.
So degenerative discs?
Degenerative discs, there was a fellow who I used to take care of. He had virtually no space in between his last vertebrae and his sacrum. And he never, ever, ever complained to me of low back pain.
What?
Nothing with prostate. Nothing with intestines, nothing with erectile tissue, nothing. Everything that you think he would have, not one time did he present that.
Why do you think?
I believe he was very active with his lifestyle, and he was in my office once a week for 30 years.
Amazing.
And so he said, as long as I stay adjusted, I know that I'm going to be okay. And I used to be so jealous of him because here I am, right, half his age. I'm thinking, God, my low back's killing me. Well, I'm kind of active. How come I'm not? Maybe I need me as a chiropractor. I don't know. But he was just one of those rare cases that, you call outliers. People come in and they have all these crazy blood work, and you're like, okay, you should be dead. And they're like, yeah, I feel pretty good. And they do really super well. But
outlier.
Outlier. Another outlier.
Outlier. Yeah.
I hate those outliers. Send your friends.
They're interesting, though,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
They're interesting, and it kind of adds to your repertoire as a practitioner, because if you've seen some outliers, then when you see them again, you're like, I know what to do, right? So that's the benefit of experience.
Experience. This is my 38th year in practice.
Wow.
And, someone asked me probably 2 or 3 years ago, when was the last time you saw something new? Like new?
Yeah.
And it's been a long time since I've seen something new. It really has. And I'm excited for that because that's what you get when you spend time loving and serving and taking care of your patients is that you're going to see a variety of issues.
Yes.
We see newborns in our office. I have a lady who's
Wow.
in her late 80s in my office. So we have to jump from adjusting or taking a small child or baby, and then I have to go next door into the next room and adjust an 88-year-old gerontology patient, and then I have to go and adjust, a massive human being who's a CrossFitter, and then I have to go adjust a mom who's tired because she's got to drive the kids to school and make lunches for the kids and clean the house and make sure dinner's on the table for dad. And then I adjust dad who's tired of going to work because he's got to bring home the bacon and put it on the table. And so, we just have a family practice. And so we see it all. And once you've seen things and you know how to, matriculate your way through taking care of them, we always start with the most basic things. We start with again, an exam. People fill out information. I want to know what they're doing, what they've experienced in the past, maybe with some maladies or conditions that they've had in the past. As you remember filling out your paperwork. Yeah. It gives me a place to start. It's a starting place, right? Ready, set, go. So it's a starting line. And then we go ahead and we do our exam. We do the heat reading. We do the metrics, the x-rays. And then we have green lights. Then we with their permission, we ask them, can we make our first adjustment? Okay. As we start taking care of people, now I'm going to get a little bit more nosy. So I'm going to offer my patients the opportunity to do a dietary analysis. Okay. And so I will give them paper. Okay. Everything's there. All they have to do is write it down. What are you eating and what times? The more detail you can give me, the better. But also on that sheet of paper is how many ounces of just pure water are you drinking? Not Pepsi, not Coke, not coffee,
not tea,
not bourbon. Well, maybe bourbon.
Maybe
just
bourbon.
kidding. Just kidding, folks. But, just water are you drinking? What physical activities are you doing during the day? Okay. How many hours of sleep are you getting per night? Okay. And then any type of nutritional supplements that you may be using.
There might be a list.
Absolutely. So now we start getting into the nitty-gritty and the warp and woof of what they're doing on a daily basis. Yes. I just had a consultation today with a gal. Just love her. She's a wonderful, wonderful lady. She's a bit overweight, and she wants to lose some weight, but she's having some spinal problems also. So we took a look at her diet, and the biggest thing was she's only getting 6 hours of sleep per night. Wow. All right. As we told last time, a little baby needs somewhere about 15, 18 hours of sleep. A kid, up to the age of 15 needs about 10 to 12. And I know that everyone thinks that's ridiculous, but we are sleep deprived in this nation. Yes. And sleep deprivation carries with it its own set of consequences. Absolutely. And they're not pretty consequences. No. And so she is in her 30s and she's not getting the proper amount of sleep. She's using store-bought nutrition products from, I think, was it the the nutrition companies that are in the malls? Yeah. General Nutrition what it is. General, so not very good products. Okay. And her diet is atrocious. Her diet is very consistent, but it's consistently atrocious. Wow. And so when you're looking in the world of nutrition, think of it this way: moderation, variety, balance. Okay. I don't want to have too much of something. I don't want to have a lack of anything. I don't want to be so rote in what I'm having every day that I'm not deviating anymore because I only like red bell peppers. Okay, well, there's orange ones and yellow ones and green ones.
Green ones, and they taste different, yeah.
By the way, for your listening audience, usually bell peppers have higher levels of vitamin C than oranges do. Wow. So there's nothing wrong with buying some peppers. That's amazing. Cutting them up, putting them in a little jar of water, and then you can just grab them and say, hey, I'm having my vitamin C. Wow. And so we looked at her, and so we made our recommendations on what to do first. Okay. In the world of nutrition, what I have my patients understand is it's not a matter of addition. First, it's a matter of deletion. Okay. And so when she's eating Snickers bars every day, when she's drinking pop every day, when she's drinking... I won't tell you what she was drinking, but I would tell you she eats probably 6 slices of bread every day. A day. Okay. And she's eating and snacking after dinner hours. And so all of those contribute to a recipe of nutritional disaster. Okay. And so remember we said in the world of biochemistry, you cannot put something in your system without it affecting your system in some way. Right. There's an effect. So you put junk food in, garbage in. Garbage out. Garbage out. You're 100% correct. Whole foods, organic foods, foods that are clean, meaning they haven't been tampered with steroids, pesticides, herbicides, antibiotics. Animals are designed to roam free, cage-free. Farm-raised fish are not the same nutritionally as ocean-going or free
Wow.
floating fish. And so you start looking at things, and unfortunately, there was a time when business was, agrarian. We would have culture, agriculture. Agriculture has morphed into agribusiness.
Yes, that's true.
I can get you a product faster these days than normal.
Right.
Right? A cow's born on January 5th. He's on your table on, October. Well, before you would born him January 1st, you would not get him on your table till January 1st of next year because
year.
they're allowed to grow at their own levels. When they inject our animals with steroids and with antibiotics, they produce a bigger, fatter cow faster, which means you weigh cows and get them to the market. So you buy cows based on their weight.
Wow.
That's the way it goes. So that's where I tell my patients as we start getting more mature into our relationship and they want to start making some changes.
Right.
Okay, let's look at some things that you need to do to make those changes. Let's start with the deletion of ultra-processed foods.
Delete those things right off because
Absolutely.
Did she agree to that? Did she say, all right, I'm going to make an effort?
We started with, let's stop with as much bread. And I said, about the bell peppers, and she liked the bell peppers.
That's right.
Right? And so that's how carrots, celery. Now you're thinking, yeah, but we're not rabbits. There's a lot of times we crunch our food and we like the crunchiness.
Exactly.
Fritos, Doritos, chips, although those are flavored chemically, artificially, so that you will want more. That is not free of anything.
That's crazy.
Doritos companies make money by selling you Doritos.
More.
In order to sell more, you want more. In order for you to want more, it tastes better. And so they chemically treat it so that your brain will say, I want more of that.
Awful.
And it's awful. It's the agribusiness, not agriculture.
Right.
So we started with her some very simple stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The most important meal of the day is breakfast, right? Why do we break our fast?
Mm-hmm.
And so that may be a whole nother podcast on nutrient timing and intermittent fasting. So if you're interested in having me back, we can do more health issues if you'd like.
A lot of people want to know, how does this work really? And can you have somebody who's not, you know what I mean? Like you're not compensated by a company to recommend a diet. So you can talk about diets dispassionately.
I am not sponsored by anybody.
No, right.
I'm the outlier. I'm the free flow. I don't get taken to lunch by anybody.
Exactly. So yeah, but it's so interesting because, we were told, put more energy out than calories in. Is that still true, or does it depend on the quality of the calorie? Or
Yes. And that may be a whole other topic.
That's another topic.
Because they're a very popular diet right now, and a popular means of losing weight is what we call a ketogenic diet.
Right.
And a ketogenic diet is where you are severely decreasing the amount and kinds of carbohydrates you're putting in, and you're looking to increase the intake of certain fats and protein. Most people, if I would poll them, I would say, is fat good for you or bad for you? Most people would say, well, fat is bad for you. And my answer is, that's not true. Mm-hmm. Bad fats are bad for you, but healthy fats are one of the most important things that we can use. For example, omega-3s, omega-7s, omega-10s, fish oils, avocado, olives, salmon, tuna, coconut, those are loaded with fat, but those are good, healthy fats that our bodies need.
Okay.
Every cell in your body has a bilipid protein layer. Mm-hmm. So in order to get into a cell, I have to go through a fat, a protein, a fat, and then I'm in your cell.
Wow.
If you eat ultra-processed foods where you're having high levels of linoleic acid, omega-6s, processed oils, vegetable oils, now you're actually decreasing the flexibility or permeability of that bilipid layer in your cell.
So you can't get in it?
Ooh, can't get in, but you also can't get out. So the metabolism of the cell that needs to get junk out of the cell doesn't move through there as well. Each cell is perforated by hundreds of something called ligands. And ligands would be like a little lock that you would put the right key in. And you put the right key in, you turn the key, things can go in the cell, things can come out of the cell. When you lack that pliability and flexibility of that bilipid layer, it'd be like me taking a Sharpie and I pull it apart and I squeeze the cap. And I just can't get it to make that connection.
Yeah.
That's what happens to the things going into the ligands. Things can't come
like a
in and
lock
things
and
can't get
key.
out. So the more healthy oils you have, the omega-3s and the omega-10s, they keep the pliability and that softness within the cell membrane.
Wow, that's super important. And
It
then,
is
so,
extremely important.
so how does like an insulin? We want insulin to get into the cell. So if there's a resistance, then the insulin can't get in.
Yeah. What happens is in your pancreas, there are wonderful little cells called islets of Langerhans. And in your listening audience, please don't memorize any of this. It's just not that important. But the islets of Langerhans produce insulin. Insulin is produced in order to regulate circulating blood sugar.
Okay.
You have to have so much sugar in your blood in order for function to take place. If I were to say to you, what's the most important nutrient, a protein, a fat, or a carbohydrate? Most people jump on and they say, oh, well, carbohydrates because we need energy. Every cell in your body requires energy, but the carbohydrate, which all carbohydrates break down to sugar. So you eating a healthy carrot, celery, potato, they all break down to sugar.
Oh, God.
You having your bourbon breaks down to sugar. You having your Coca-Cola
Breaks down to sugar. Oh my goodness.
Your ragu tomato
Yeah,
sauce
yeah.
is about 3 fingers full of sugar. So start from the bottom, and that's about how much sugar you have in each bottle of ragu. So sugar's
butter,
everywhere. It's
even,
also a
right?
preservative. It makes things taste good, right?
Right.
It's great around Valentine's Day. The problem is it's our most readily used source of energy. So if I take 1 gram of sugar and burn it up as a source of energy, I'm going to get, I don't know, maybe 3-4 grams of energy, out of that kind of stuff. If I do that with fat, I'm going to be burning 9 calories.
Okay.
So you can see that in order to burn fat, I will use more calories to get the job done.
Okay.
When too much blood sugar gets in the system, a specialized nerve endings called chemoreceptors pick that up, relay it to the brain and say, hey, we're having a little bit of too much sweetness in here. What are we going to do? The brain regulates it, sends information to the pancreas and says, hey, Mr. Pancreas, see if you can recruit those islets of Langerhans to produce insulin.
Right.
Insulin rushes out of the system, it grabs a hold of the sugar, and it does one of 3 things. It wants to store it in a muscle,
Okay.
it wants to store it in the liver, or it wants to store it in your brain.
Wow.
What happens when we have too much? Well, hey, we're going to have to keep producing more insulin, keep producing more insulin. And what does the pancreas do? It fatigues. And so the insulin resistance is I have to put much more sugar in my system to even get my pancreas to respond by producing insulin. Wow. That's type 2 diabetes.
Oh my God.
Type 1 diabetes is they lack the islets of Langerhans function right from birth, and so they have to take insulin.
Because they can't produce it themselves.
Because they can't produce
That's
it themselves.
Type 1. So type 2.
Now, just in curiosity, you are a pretty smart gal. What is known now as type 3 diabetes?
Wow. Something to do with cholesterol or something? Or
Alzheimer's. They're going to want to re-regulate it because
I didn't know.
excess chronic circulating sugar crosses the blood-brain barrier. And what does sugar do? Sugar causes an acid reaction within our blood. It also causes inflammation. And what are they finding out with people who have type 2 diabetes? They're usually chronically inflamed.
Right.
And what are they finding out with people with Alzheimer's? Chronically inflamed, even within brain tissue.
So if we cut back on sugar a little bit, then that would be good for a lot of reasons.
I would say we should cut back on sugar a lot of it, not a little bit.
Yeah, and that would be so. Like that's amazing because I don't know if there's more people who have dementia or Alzheimer's now than say 50 years ago. Do you think that there's? Do you think it's the same level?
If you want to go off on some weird conspiracy for about 5 minutes, I'll tell you. I'll tell you my thoughts on it if you would like to know.
Okay.
All right. What diseases are really super prevalent now that weren't prevalent 50 years ago?
Like diabetes.
Yep.
Arthritis. Is that a disease?
Yeah, it's considered.
Sort of. High
How
blood
about
pressure.
ADD?
What's ABD?
ADD,
Oh,
attention deficit disorder.
Yes, it is.
How about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder?
I'm sure.
How about type 2 diabetes? How about
Definitely.
childhood obesity?
Definitely.
How about blood disturbances in children's blood?
Probably.
How about Alzheimer's?
Yes. So,
How about Parkinson's?
yes.
How about overall dementias?
Oh my
what has increased over the last 50 years at an exponential rate that if you were to actually see, if I were to put this in a picture form, would blow you away.
Sugar.
Sugar, number one. Agribusiness, number two.
Yeah.
And look at the amount of immunizations and injections that we give for everything.
Wow. Does that affect?
Remember we said, biochemically, you cannot put something in the body without having it be in effect.
Right. That's interesting then, isn't it?
There are lots of neuropathologists that are beginning to question the whole idea behind what are we putting into our kids' bodies.
Wow. So parents today have
They have a choice. And here, let's be honest with each other. When I go to the medical doctor and I say, hey, I'm having zodiac in my ear hole, I mean, I'm going there hoping that he knows exactly how to take care of zodiac of the ear hole, right? Okay. If you look at their curriculum, how much time do you think the average medical doctor spends in his schooling on nutrition?
Very little?
Yeah, maybe a week, if that.
Yeah,
how much do you think he spends on immunizations?
Maybe the same amount of time.
Same amount of time.
Yeah.
So here's what it is. Okay, your kids come in, they're born. Here's what we're going to do. They go through their normal childhood vaccinations, and then they just agree with everything that they heard because, I mean, after all, we've been doing it forever and ever.
Right.
Amen. The problem is we haven't been doing it forever and ever. And so at 61 years old, I had a DPT, and I had an MMR, and I had a polio, right?
At 61?
That's 61. That's when I was a kid at birth. That's the only thing I've had. 3 immunizations in my entire life.
Right.
All right.
What about now?
Now, from birth to around 18, there's usually scheduled somewhere around 60 immunizations or injections that will take place, quote unquote, on a schedule.
My God.
Now, what do you think happens when you keep putting all that chemistry within the system?
There's going to be an effect.
There's going to be an effect.
Do you think like something like autism might be chemically? What do you think?
You're asking great questions, and I don't know where you're getting them from.
Yeah,
but for some reason, I've been reading a lot on what you're asking me.
It's our
There's actually a
conversation.
fellow out there, he's a neurobiologist, that is beginning to look at certain amounts of bacteria in children's guts called the microbiome.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds of different kinds of bacteria. As a matter of fact, there are more bacterial cells in your body than there are human cells. So just in case you think that you're the cat's meow, you're just a transport vehicle for lots of bacteria.
Isn't
right?
that crazy?
You, Mr. Bacteria.
You wouldn't think. You wouldn't think.
You wouldn't think. And they're finding out that kids who are autistic have a specific strain
Interesting.
that is low. And because of something called the gut-brain axis, which means the 10th cranial nerve called the vagus nerve,
Yes.
is in communication with the gut, and the gut microbiome sends information over that nerve into the brain that says, hey, we got some things going on down here. And your brain says, my goodness, what do we have going down there? Let's check it out.
Wow.
Because remember, the nervous system's job is to take in information moment by moment and make the proper adaptations.
Yes.
So imagine how many messages are hitting your brain right now so that you're just maintaining a posture talking to me.
Right.
Okay, when was the last time you thought about how much CO2 you're exhaling or how much O2 you're taking in?
Never.
You have a nervous system that tells you exactly how much. You ate a dead chicken sandwich, you replace the protein in your system, and you're going to get rid of the byproduct later on in the bathroom. It's a
Right.
pretty cool system. By the way, how much pressure is in your toenail? I don't know either, but your nervous system knows exactly. So you're talking second by second adaptations, millions of impulses going to and forth from the brain over to those tissue cells so they can maintain proper function.
So where does the vagus nerve? Where is it in the spine? Where does the vagus?
The vagus nerve comes out of the brain stem itself, the
Okay.
medulla oblongata again.
Okay, so right in the base,
Right.
the base of
Yep.
the skull.
There's been some research that shows that
interesting.
people who receive chiropractic adjustments to their first two vertebrae actually reduce their blood pressure. Can be as effective as blood pressure reducing medication.
Wow. Do you?
All because we adjust the spine and make sure that the nervous system is allowed to take information from the system and make its proper
freely.
adaptations.
Do you go for chiropractic adjustments?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
I get checked 2 to 3 times a week.
Wow.
I'm very active. You know that.
You are,
We see a
yeah.
lot of people in our office, so I'm physical all day long. I do train people at the gym. I have a certain clientele that train, and then I'm in the gym training 3 days a week myself. So I'm very
see 'em,
physically active.
Yeah, and I think you have young athletes coming in
Lots of
to
athletes.
see you. Lots of people who are maybe playing for fun, but also play for schools and organized sports and things like that.
We
And
have
so-
a young fellow who came in. He's just a wonderful young kid. He's a pitcher on his baseball team, and he's long and lanky and ropey. He reminds me very much of Randy Johnson, who used to pitch in the major leagues. And his arm and his shoulder were hurt, where every time he was throwing, he was hurting.
Poor guy.
And he's only 14 years old. So I said, bring him in. Well, he's 6'2" at 14.
At
But
14?
he's like a beanpole, though. He doesn't have any meat on him. But he can he can hurl the pill, which is nice. And so we did an analysis on his spine and his shoulder and his elbow, and we saw some what we called kinetic problems.
Okay.
If you remember the nursery rhyme when you were a kid, right? The foot bone's connected to the ankle bone, right? Well, in this case, the finger bone's connected to the wrist bone's to the elbow to the shoulder to the spine.
Right.
So we followed the kinetic chain. We found some misalignments. We did a little bit of soft tissue work. And within a week, he throwing 80 pitches a game, and he says, "I can't believe how great I feel."
I can't believe it. That's amazing. That's a huge success story because I'm glad that his parents, knew that this could help. Let's go.
Here's the crazy part of that story. His mom comes to see me and his grandma comes to see me.
That's
So
amazing.
3 generations
That's
of family. And again, you
That
don't
makes
get
so
that
happy.
after a week in practice. You get that
No.
after a week of starting with the mom, and then the kid comes in, then the kid grows, and the kid gets married and has a kid. And so
then they bring in their-
Yeah, that's the beautiful part
It's
about having a family
wonderful.
practice is you get to see families.
Yeah, and 36 years of families. And have you been at the same location?
Since 1988.
Wow.
I practiced a couple of years in Illinois.
Right, because that's where you learned, right?
I
That's where
went
you
to
did
school
your
in Iowa,
internship and all,
and then I did my first year and a half in Illinois.
like a practicum.
It was a spinal rehabilitation group, so we would take people whose spines need to be rehabbed, and we would use chiropractic as the method, and then other things to go along with that.
A
Yeah,
lot of good practice, a lot of good learning because you're learning every day. You're
Still
still
learning.
learning every day, aren't you?
still
Yeah,
learning.
You still are.
My dad was a genius, and I say that out of truth. He was a genius, and he used to, drop pearls of wisdom on me, like use your head for something other than a hat rack. And so he was just telling us, think. Turn off the TV and read. You can watch TV anytime you want. Read.
What a
Learn
great
how to
role
read.
model.
Yeah, and so he was a genius. He had his PhD from U of M. He was a full bird colonel in the United States Air Force. Spoke 4 languages fluently. I mean, the guy was just phenomenal.
Wow.
And so we were taught as kids to think and read and keep learning. And he would say, "You stop learning is the day. The day you stop learning is the day you start dying.
Oh
you
my
can
God,
learn
that's
something."
True, though.
Even in his this is a strange thing. I shouldn't say this, but even in his last 2 weeks of life, when I was down in Florida, he was down in Miami, and his wife was going to the library to get him a book, and he said, "Can you give me a book on Switzerland, please?" And after she had left, I said, "Daddy," I said, why do you want a book on Switzerland?" He looked at me and said, "Do I look dead to you?"
Wow.
I
so
said,
he's
"No."
still.
He said, "I'm still learning." He said, "I may take it to the grave," and he passed away 2 weeks later. He said, "What do you care what I learn?" He said, "What you should care is about what you're learning. So keep studying."
Unbelievable. What a great, unbelievable mentor, motivating force, like everything. Just, that's incredible. But you come from good stock because those brain, the brain, it's.
Well, I don't think I'll ever be as smart as my dad. That's for sure. And
But
my
you
mom was
went-
quite brilliant also, to tell you the truth. She was
That's
just shy of her
amazing.
getting her
Oh my God.
doctorate, and she was a high school counselor and teacher. She was phenomenal at reading. She was the one who really said, "Let's go to the library. Daddy wants you to read, but let's go to the library and pick out some books for you."
God
And then
bless her.
so she was the one, how excited I was to get a library card, right? Every kid wants a
Oh my
Matchbox
God.
car. I got a library card.
That's so exciting. But look at the doors that open through your
Well,
whole life. I mean, it's amazing.
I remember my dad saying to me in a weird way, he said, "I have burned down towns. I have murdered men. I've made love to thousands of women. I've danced with kings and queens." And I looked at him and he said, "All because I read.
Wow.
All because I read." And he named
What
like
a
3 or 4,
lovely
more
soul.
things. And I'm like,
Unbelievable.
Yeah, you're right, Dad.
Wow. Well, I've so enjoyed having this discussion with you, Dr.
Good.
Christopher. And yeah, we could plan another couple of shows because there's always topics that, people just want to know, the everyday person who's watching this, can you explain it in terms that we can understand? That's what you do, but you also, no question, have like this highest level overview, but you can also like make things reasonable and digestible, and you can actually like see what you're talking about. So thank you for doing the x-rays.
Yeah,
and
no
for,
problem.
showing me on the chart like where I'm having problems. because, it's just good to know like what you're going through every day. And I can tell you exactly where I get like pain. And it's just, you know what, if you don't do anything about it, like, what are you going to do? If it's already degenerative or if there's already nerve impinging, you have to
get on top of that. Absolutely.
You have to get help.
One of the things that I enjoy about my practice, and I hope my patients do too, is that we teach them what to do when you're away from our office.
Exactly.
Because most of your life is spent away from my office.
The office, yeah.
So let's teach you some strategies on what to do away from the office. To be quite honest, Susan, there are people who don't want to learn what to do. They want to, they get that one-hit wonder. They're like, yeah, we've got just, I feel great. I'll see you next time I come in. And the answer is they change their oil when their oil light comes on.
That's true. And you know what? Like, it's their body and all that, so that's okay. But it's great for the rest of us that we can do things in the right direction, because the body's always wanting homeostasis.
Absolutely. Great word.
Right? And so I think that's, it's just good to know what we can do. And I never knew that dementia and all, like, could be like a third type.
That's what they're renaming it.
That's unbelievable.
By the way, if your patients want to know, they're going to be renaming obesity pretty soon. It won't be called obesity anymore. They'll come up with a new name.
Oh, that's nice. Maybe a gentler name.
I hope not.
Because you want people to still be serious about.
Excuse me. I want people to understand that carrying the extra weight, you're carrying extra potential for problems.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a problem. Weight in our country is a problem, and it starts at the dinner table. It starts at the breakfast table. Mm-hmm. It starts with Fruity Pebbles and Flintstones.
Yes.
As opposed to a healthy breakfast of 2 eggs and an avocado and some blueberries. I mean, there are just so different ways. These Lunchables. The Lunchables are not good. The school system, what they serve, it's not as good. You want to go somewhere where you're going to get the worst food in all the world because it's cheap? Go to a hospital and eat their food.
Wow.
The food that they serve in hospitals is just cheap, low-grade nutrition.
Still, after all these years, after people becoming dietitians and nutritionists.
Absolutely. And they know it.
Because it's inexpensive.
Healthcare has become a business, has it not?
Oh my God, that's true. It's crazy to know the factors behind, the cows are fatter sooner.
Absolutely.
So, right?
Yeah.
All of it. It's kind of business. It's just insane. So thrilled to be your friend and to also be your patient.
Good.
And I'm so happy. The spinal joint, is that the name of your email? If anybody has questions, was it?
The spinaljoint.com is our webpage.
Very good. Okay, the spinal joint.
And if they really wanted to, they could email me there. But if they want to get directly in contact with me, it is thotflash at sbcglobal.net. thotflash at sbcglobal.net. And as long as they ring in and say, hey, I heard your podcast, I'll be more than happy to go ahead and answer the questions.
That's amazing.
And if any of your listeners want to come in and say, I'd like to experience chiropractic and see what your office is all about, the consultation is always for free. You can come in and talk and say, hey, what do we have going on here? How would we handle this?
That's amazing.
And that's just my service to your listeners.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for blessing us with your presence and your unbelievable knowledge. And I'm just thrilled to know you and to learn from you. Thank you.
Thanks.
What a pleasure. So we'll see you next time. And thanks so much for tuning in. And I hope we enjoyed learning about ourselves, really. Thank you.
If you can send me another address where they can see that, or is it the same address that you gave me before?